Jmix platform consists of Jmix Framework and Jmix Studio, a set of professional tools that steps up your developer experience. In this video, let's look at the key Studio features to help you get started quickly. After you create a new project, you'll see the welcome screen. Here you'll find our documentation and learning resources, social media links, communication and support channels, framework and plugin versions, and account details. You can always go back to the welcome screen. Just click the question mark, and you'll find the link. Next on the left is quick access to Gradle tasks. Then, the settings menu. And the most important element, the button with a plus sign. It lets you add components to your project, from entities and beans to quick deployment tools and integration tests. You can also add any of these using the context menu in the Jmix project tree. Just right-click on the appropriate section. Let's start by adding a new entity to the data model. For this, use the context menu in the data model section. Here we'll give our entity a name. After that, Studio will take us to a special designer where we can edit the entity. For example, we can add a simple attribute. Or, we can add an attribute with validation, like checking if an email address is in the correct format. We can also create an associated attribute along with its inverse attribute in another entity, all without changing the context. Any changes we make in the designer will show up in the code, and vice versa. Studio allows you to switch between the text and designer tabs whenever you need. Now that we've added the entity, let's create a view for it. As always, there are a few ways to do this. And besides the ones we mentioned, we can use the button in the designer. This way we won't have to specify which entity the new view is for. Studio will let us choose a view template. Let's go with one that creates two views. One to show entity instances in a list, and another to edit details for a specific instance. You can see the entity here, followed by the Java package, and then the menu section where we'll have the new item to open the list view. Below are advanced settings that let us change the names of the descriptor and controller files. We'll talk about those files a bit later. Then we have some values for view identifiers and view routes. The default values work for us, so let's move on to the next step. Now, let's decide what actions are available for instances on the view. By default, they are create, edit, and remove. We'll keep these actions as is. Next, let's choose the attributes we want to see on each of our views. First, we'll select attributes for the list view, and then for the details view. Finally, you can change the view title and the menu item name. If you chose to support multiple languages when creating the project, you can add translations right away. You can totally handle this later. Localized messages are stored in special files. Let's finish creating the views. Both of our views are now added to the project tree. Inside each of them, there's a Java controller and an XML descriptor. You can see what the views look like in the Studio. There's a preview function for that. Or you can check it out in the running application. We'll go over the steps to launch it shortly. Let's say we want to add a visual component to this view. For example, this can be a button to show the number of customers. Let's go back to the descriptor. Here on the right is a tree of the components we already have. We can add a new one using the component palette. So let's search for the button component and put it next to other buttons like so. When you select a component, its properties show up in the inspector panel, so you can see and edit them. Let's use this to add an identifier for the button. Okay, we created a button, but it doesn't do anything just yet. Let's work on that. Every component can have handlers that define how it interacts with the user. You can add them through the Handlers tab. Let's add a click handler for the button. When we do this, we'll be taken to the View controller and a new handler method will be there for us. This is where you can add the logic you need. To help with that, let's use the Code Snippets tool. Here you'll find handy code parts for different situations. Once you add a snippet, feel free to make some adjustments. This query now gets the number of customers in our application. Let's show that number in a notification. If the logic is complicated, you can move it to a separate service. Let me show you how with our example. I'll copy the query and create a new Spring Bean. Then I'll place the query inside a method in that bean. Once we have it set, we can inject it into the controller and call the method whenever we need to execute that query. All right, it's time to run our application. To launch the application, click the Run button. If this is the first run, or if there have been changes to the data model, you will see a special dialog with a list of changelog files. These files help update the database based on changes in the data model. You can review these changes if needed. Let's save and proceed with the run. Shortly after, you'll see a link that lets you open the application. The first run will also take some time to prepare the front-end bundle, but future runs will be faster. Now, let's log into the application and check out the views we created earlier. Here's the customer list view. Creating a new entry will open the Details view. After we save the data, we'll be taken to the previous view and see the new customer in the list. The application is running well, but it looks like I forgot to add the text for the button. The nice thing is that you won't have to restart the application to add it. The Hot Deploy feature in Studio lets you apply this change instantly. Let's head back to the descriptor and add the button text. And while we're at it, let's also add an icon. Now you can trigger Hot Deploy by clicking the icon here, or just by saving the file. After that, go back to the browser and refresh the page. Studio will detect the changes and bring them to the application. Studio provides a quick cloud deployment option that lets you run your application on a newly created AWS instance. You can also build and deploy the application in almost any environment as a Docker image, and there are some basic tools to assist you with that as well. And of course, you can deploy your applications as executable jar or WAR files using the standard Spring Boot tooling. And now we've taken an overview of the key features in Studio. You can keep exploring with our demo applications, learning materials, and documentation. If you have any questions, let us know in the comments or contact us on social media. Wishing you success in all your projects.